from the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are safe, sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in the yacht club just as soon as conditions permit. Those of us who've been to the YC lately recognize that the club's not ready to totally open for luncheon business. Maybe sometime in September, we cannot say for sure. Our speaker today, born in Long Beach, went to Newport Harbor High School, graduated from UCLA and Hastings College of the Law, before serving as Deputy District Attorney for Riverside and then Los Angeles counties, and then was in private law practice in Northern and Southern California for 50 years, during which time he also was an active part of the yachting scene. He learned to sail in Sausalito in a Choily 43, which means he learned in a safe environment because Choilies were heavy, not really racing boats. They proliferated all around the world in the 60s and early 70s, and many people started sailing in those. He would go on to become a Commodore of the Sausalito Yacht Club and on the board of directors of U.S. Sailing and Transpacific Yacht Club. During his 40 years of sailing, he had many great adventures, which he tells in his newly released book, Shore, 40 Years of Sailing. We want to offer a great welcome to today's guest, Greg Brown. Greg, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Ron, I appreciate the invitation, and as I say, I'm not some of the quality of the sailors that you've had in the past, but I have been foolish enough to write a book about sailing. The reason I wrote the book actually was in reference to a gentleman by the name of Ernie Van Asperen. When I first met him in 1998, I was 83 years old. He's in the upper corner of these photographs, holding on in reference to his boat. I first had contact with him in San Francisco. His boat was a Baltic 64 named Quintessence that you see in a lower photograph.
But let me ask you a question, Greg. Is he holding on for dear life like that because you're driving?
That's undoubtedly true. That photograph was taken off of Mexico. I actually met him first in San Francisco. He had bought this boat in St. Petersburg, Florida, brought it through the canal, and I first saw it in Sausalito, Main Harbor. He had purchased the boat with some spinnakers that he had not seen in that trip up, and he wanted to have them aired out in San Francisco Bay, and I was invited to come along. The next thing I knew, he was in need of some help in reference to the boat in various places, and I ended up sailing about 5,000 miles with him. In doing so, Ernie was quite an interesting character, and frankly, when he passed away at 97 in 2013, the obituary that only identified him as a skilled yachtsman. I thought it was such a sterile presentation of his yachting skills and his personality that I decided to write something up. So that inspired me to write about Ernie specifically. And then I realized that there had been a number of individuals over the years that I had gone sailing with that were great individuals that I wanted to preserve in some form or fashion by way of writing my experiences with them. So just to give you an example of Ernie, you would not probably identify him as a hero in our society. But in fact, during World War II, he was a B-24 bomber pilot, did 4 of the Poesti oil field raids. And if you're not up with World War II history, Poesti oil field was the primary oil refinery position for the Germans, and we were bombing it, and we were losing over 20% of our aircraft every raid. So by him doing 4, he was tempting fate at that point. He also, if you had been around San Francisco in the 70s or 80s, you bought your liquor at Ernie's Liquors. He had started that with one store by borrowing some money from his aunt, opening the store. She covered it during the day, he covered it at night, and then he slept in a back room. So he said the only problem with the building was that it had rats and he had to kill rats in the middle of the night. He built that into...
He needed a cat. He just needed a cat. What's wrong with that?
He built that into 83 liquor stores, sold that, and then went on to other businesses. He owned the Dock Restaurant in Tiburon, and when I met him, he owned Round Hill Vineyards up in Napa. He was actually the second largest wine bottler in California at that moment. So I get on this boat. At one point, I've been asked to sail from San Diego down to Cabo San Lucas. There is a girl of 23 who has just graduated from the San Francisco Culinary Academy as cook. We have one woman who is identified as a skipper because she has a six-pack license, and a buddy of mine by the name of John Rowley. We took off out of San Diego. There had been a storm that had recently passed through. We had 25-knot breezes, and the seas were extremely confused. The two females ended up seasick and disappeared, which left John, Ernie, and I to helm this vessel that weighed 60-some thousand pounds down the coast to Cabo for the next 40 hours. And Ernie was part and parcel of helming the vessel in these confused, heavy seas for those 40 hours. So at 83, he had nothing on Gunga Din. I ended up sailing with him other places, and there happened to be a photograph of us on a bird sanctuary island off of Mexico that you see, as well as us being anchored in the marina of Las Hadas with his gangplank. You'll notice that the boat had a rather extreme reverse transom, but we had a beautiful gangplank to walk on and off the boat while we were anchored inside that circumstance.
Wait, Greg, I got to ask another question. In these two pictures that you have collaged on the screen right now, you're driving with the red hat on and the white shirt, and then on a different, maybe presumably a different day, you're in the bird sanctuary, and you got the same white shirt and red hat on. Am I picking the details, or do you ever change clothes? What's the deal?
There was no washing machine on the boat.
How long ago was this picture taken, Greg?
These pictures were taken in 1998, 99.
And you were in the same shirt?
No, I'm in a different shirt today. I am notorious for keeping shirts way beyond their exit date, but in any case, the circumstances, I ended up sitting on the U.S. Sailing Board for 15 years and arguing about a number of things. I actually want to pop back to my early sailing career, and my first boat was actually an Erickson 35.
Venerable fleet. Turns out that I'm a partner in an Erickson 35 that's in South Beach Harbor today. I don't sail it very often because youngster gets more of my attention.
Okay.
Boy, Erickson 35s, they're everywhere. Venerable fleet.
There is a picture of my first boat, Rainbow, off of Sausalito, and you'll notice several things about this. The first is that we're reefed. The second is that nobody's sitting on the rail. The third is, as you know, in reference to Erickson 35s, they have a pretty good sized cockpit and is rather useful if you happen to be racing the boat. I bought this boat because I had some sailing lessons through the College of Marin that consisted of going out on that Choi Lee that you mentioned. And then second, I had a friend who had a Islander 36, and I had sailed on that. So this boat appealed to me in reference to size, even though I had very limited experience in actually sailing when I bought the boat in 1979. Shortly after I bought the boat, a gentleman by the name of Ted Reed approached me, looked at the boat, and said, "That would be great for racing." Now, realize that at the time, I had not raced any race. I did not know things like racing rules, racing instructions, or anything else. But within 3 weeks of buying the boat, here I was doing a Tuesday night race out of Sausalito. Ted had put together a crew and said he would act as the tactician.
Wait, I have to ask, Craig, are you suggesting that guys who sail in the Tuesday night series in Sausalito often don't know the racing rules?
Well, let me tell you my experience.
As a Commodore?
We started the race thinking that indeed we had some idea what we were doing. And immediately the majority of the fleet, led by a yellow boat, immediately tacked and went over towards the Sausalito shore. We were starting at the Knox buoy and we were going up to Yellow Bluff. I asked Ted whether I should tack with everybody else. And he said, "No, continue on." Well, shortly thereafter, it became extremely evident that the current was carrying us toward Golden Gate Bridge, and we were going to beat ourselves to death getting back to Yellow Bluff. I finished that race, realized that I knew nothing about sailing or racing specifically, and went over to the owner of the yellow boat, which happened to be John and Sue Raleigh. The boat was named Awesome Possum. I then proceeded to crew on that boat for 2 years, learning something about sailing in San Francisco, its tides, and they were heavily into racing and were doing the YRA season. So basically, I spent 2 years trying to learn what I probably should have known in the first place when I bought the boat. The second part of it is, as I mentioned, it was reefed. This was actually what was known as a Southern California rig. That meant that the mast was 3 feet taller than the, quote, Northern California Erickson 35, which of course I was clueless to when I bought the boat. I owned that boat for 9 years. We went from cruising around with it to jumping into racing it. And Bruce Monroe, who also owned an Erickson 35, and I ultimately created a one design class that we raced as a class in YRA racing for several years. But I was foolish enough to also walk down the dock and talk to other people on the dock. So the next thing I know, I'm talking to a gentleman by the name of Walt Wilson, who owned a boat called Wauhope 2.
Right.
And he proceeds to say, "How would you like to sail across the pond?" Now, of course, the pond he was referring to was the Pacific Ocean. So within 2 years of my buying Rainbow, I was conscripted into a syndicate of people to do the 81 Transpac. I ended up on a boat called Brown Sugar, which was a 38-foot Peterson cold molded boat that had done extremely well in 79. The syndicate decided that that was the boat to sail. Now, I have to explain to you that Walt Wilson was a former Ohio State lineman, was approximately 6'5" or 6'6", weighed close to 300 pounds at the time I met him. And he originally wanted to sail on a boat called Nalu 4. But the rest of us were slightly smaller in both girth and height. And that boat was built for an earlier age with bigger people, the iron men with wooden boats. In any case, the next thing I knew, we had found Brown Sugar, we chartered Brown Sugar, and The week before, we were sailing down to Southern California to take off on the Transpac. We got off of Santa Cruz, a running backstay block blew out, and we were suddenly mastless. We motored into Santa Cruz, and the first person I saw on the dock was a bespectacled individual with red socks and purple deck shoes. And lo and behold, I met Bill Lee. Bill was a fixture, of course, in Santa Cruz. Everybody knew him, and he proceeded to help us put together the logistics to get a new mast, sails repaired, and the boat to Long Beach to start the race, literally a week later. Lo and behold, we're tuning the mast as we're going out to the start of the race. We did the race with a gentleman by the name of Mike Grandin, we had conscripted as a navigator. And along the way, we were sailing along only to find that we had found Hilo instead of Honolulu. We sailed an extra 300 miles on the course, but we're 8 hours off of winning time that actually was one corrected by Sweet Okole. Ironically, many of the 79 crew from Brown Sugar had been on Sweet Okole, and they decided to regale us at the dinner after the Transpac. And one of them had on a 79 Brown Sugar shirt. They sprayed some champagne around, got a few of the Transpac board a little upset, and we got a letter that we were going to be banned from the next Transpac. Fortunately, I convinced them that we were not actually the ones who were spraying the champagne, and I joined the Transpacific Yacht Club in '82. Shortly after that foray, I became involved in a number of other sailing endeavors, sailed the '82 Big Boat Series on Zamazan, and I had met one of the co-crew on that boat, Rick Lowry. This picture is of Rick Lowry helming a boat in the Caribbean. He had a boat down there that was actually a tax write-off for his computer sales business.
We want to ask anybody who works for the IRS to turn off this program for the next 5 minutes. Go back ahead.
I've already been audited by the IRS about my sailing activities, so we will continue on. The boat was actually a horrible British knockoff of the Swan 441, had an iron keel and sailed poorly, but we looked good. So 4 months later, we see a copy of The Yacht magazine, a rather glossy routine that had a presentation about the Rolex Cup down in the Caribbean. And we were prominently figured in many of the photographs, I guess because they had figured out that we were slow enough that they could catch us on the photo boat. Was a former, what used to be called UDT guy from the Navy, and he had a buddy from the Navy by the name of Don Campion. So the next thing I know, Rick is inviting me to go sailing on Merlin, which Don Campion is again bought as a tax write-off against his dental business. This is a picture of us finishing the Transpac. The balding guy is Don Campion. We started doing races in '84 by doing a Cabo run.
Tell us more people in this picture. Is that Skip Stevely, the bottom part of the picture, lower left?
Skip Stevely is at the bottom. Rick Lowry is 2 up. Bruce Burgess from Hawaii is there. Bill Leary was our navigator. That's my brother, Grant Brown, who sailed with us. The crew was actually a composite that had been put together by Skip Stevely, who knew several of these sailors from Hawaii, and Fred Dean, who is the one holding his hand up, is from Hawaii. He was the J24 state champion there and had sailed on Libelia Flash. And this picture is of us finishing in 1987. After the 87 Transpac, I had been foolish enough to think I should buy another boat. And so I started looking for another boat, ended up buying a Serendipity 43, which was originally named America. Dick Mann had owned the boat. I bought it from him in 1987, renamed the boat Corsair because the original boat was a turquoise blue color with red spars and a red velour interior, which wasn't my taste. So I renamed her Corsair. We sailed her 89 in San Francisco Bay and were successful at winning season championship with a crew that was primarily kids. A lot of them had been juniors out of the Sausalito Junior program. My daughter had sailed there and coached as a instructor for 4 years. So I knew many of the kids. I conscripted them into the boat. And in that first year, we did extremely well. One of the things that ended up happening is because there is a painting that is by Jimmy DeWitt. Now, Jimmy used to do a poster for season championships, and everybody got a signed copy of the poster. But for 89, he made the mistake of mentioning that he might be willing to do a few of the winners if they sent him a photograph. So, of course, the next thing he knew, he was trying to do 20 individual paintings of each of the winners. This happens to be of Corsair, including us flying a blooper. Those of you who actually still remember a blooper, that's what it looked like. This is us in 91 doing the Long Beach Race Week with Corsair. Frankly, the sail down was more enjoyable than the actual sailing in Long Beach. We ended up with heavy winds. We blew out a 2.2 chute that looked like Zorro had attacked it. And we continued on doing a number of sailing activities in Southern California. I ended up, because of my involvement with both PCYA, where I ultimately became Commodore of that organization, and U.S. Sailing, meeting a number of individuals. And in 93, I got a call from Jack Cahill, who was a physician up in Seattle that had moved down to the Bay Area, that he wanted to charter Obsession, a mini maxi, for the Newport and Sonata race. So I got conscripted into that crew, and here I am driving the mini maxi Obsession.
How long was the boat?
The boat is 70 feet long. To give you a sense of the power of this boat, you have hydraulic rams that move the jib cars. The mast is over 110 feet. It took 6 of us to carry the mainsail down to the boat. And we ended up sailing in a class that included Santa Cruz 70s. Now, of course, we weighed 69,000 pounds, and we felt that we shouldn't be in that same class because if they took off surfing, we were going to be still sitting there. Well, lo and behold, Newport in Sonata, it was blowing 8 knots of breeze. They couldn't surf. And we get down to Ensenada. We finished the race. We thought we had done well because they had to all give us time. And nobody understood who had won. Brad Avery had taken the boat back to Newport Beach. So a year later, the committee calls up Jack Cahill and says, "Give us back the trophy." And he said, "What trophy?" Well, lo and behold, we had won the class. And the only benefit was that we were on the 94 Newport and Ensenada cover of the brochure. You can see I ended up in various sundry activities, separate and distinct from my boat. The next thing is because I ended up being foolish enough to volunteer to help out the Admirals Cup team. I ended up a schlepper going to the Admirals Cup in '99. This is a photograph of a place called Egypt House. It's a beach cottage of the Ward family that was first built in 1805 on the Isle of Wight. We had 17 of us sleeping in that facility, including the owner of the yacht Idler, George David, who was at that moment CEO of United Technology, as well as our entrant for the bigger boat series. Everybody at Admirals Cup has ribs. In the upper corner, on the red rib, is Talbot Wilson in a red shirt and I in a blue vest. Talbot is an individual I met at U.S. Sailing. He is a well-known sailor out of Pensacola Yacht Club, and he introduced me to Southern sailing. I've done sails from Pensacola down to Isla Mujeres on his vessel, as well as on other vessels that he's introduced me to. And I was foolish enough to decide that I would take Corsair down to the Caribbean. I had her trucked to Texas and ended up sailing over to St. Pete. Here's a picture of her sitting in St. Peter Harbor. Unfortunately, she's been marooned here for 5 years because of hurricanes, storms, lightning, and unfortunately some healthcare issues for me. So she's still sitting down the dock from where we are seated right this second. I wrote the book for the purposes of two things: passing on our history in reference to the many people I've met through sailing and some of my experiences. So the book is 273 pages of both photographs and stories. You've seen some of them. And this happens to be a picture of my daughter and I sailing off of Long Beach. My experiences are varied. I tried to show some of the people that I've sailed with and some of the unique aspects of those people. As I say, how I got into all these things was turning around when somebody said, let's do something. I proceeded to say, sure.
So let me ask you, when you bought the Serendipity 43, did you buy it in San Francisco Bay? Where did you get it?
It was sitting in Sausalito, up by the old Esom Yard.
Uh-huh. And when you sailed the boat, what was your typical crew size?
Well, in San Francisco, we had 13. That was to create 2,100 pounds of weight, which was the critical. Frankly, I had had Scott Esom set up the boat. He acted as tactician on many occasions. Wayne Moscow was the other tactician early on. And frankly, without Scotty's help, we probably would have never done as well as we did. Of course, he was at that point selling North sails. I spent an inordinate amount of North sails and would probably never rationally have done that again.
Spoken like a veteran yachtsman. So when you would be racing the boat in the bay, give us your schedule. Typical, how much bay sailing, how much ocean sailing in the boat?
Originally, we did YRA season. We did do the Seawee Suit Trophy. We ended up taking a fourth to Herve Bay's Bravura. I ended up in a little set two with him again in the Stone Cup. Kostecki was driving Bravura at that point. He was definitely behind us as we rounded a mark, but we had a foul up in reference to the spinnaker as we were dropping it. Kostecki decided that he could push between us, and Brazzoni was my tactician that day, was yelling and screaming, no room at the mark. But
I can't hear Mike. I can hardly imagine Mike yelling and screaming, no room at the mark.
We got thrown out of the Stone Cup. um, in any case, as I say, I've owned the boat since 1987. She left the bay in 2003, and I have exhumed the dinosaur on several occasions. We did the '05 and '07 Long Beach Race Week. We actually tied for first in our class in Long Beach Race Week and lost with a totally novice crew by 0.26 seconds to a Martel 38. The crew was actually a group of sailors out of the UCLA sailing team. None of them had ever sailed anything bigger than a 470 when I got them on board. And we ended up having a great fun. The best we did at the Long Beach Race Week, but we also did a race over to Catalina. And this was a overnight race where you sailed over on Saturday from Long Beach, sailed back on Sunday. So all these kids suddenly were at Catalina, sitting on a boat. They'd never slept on a boat. They'd never stayed overnight on a boat. And they'd never gone swimming in clean water, as opposed to the circumstances of Marina del Rey. They enjoyed their experience more about that than the racing itself.
So Doug Peterson was a great designer, of course, and a good buddy of mine. And did he spend any time on the boat?
I had met Doug through various sailing activities, at least during the time I owned it. He wasn't on the boat. Unfortunately, when he passed away, I was contacted by some individuals who were trying to put together information about Doug's history and sent it off to MIT. And I contributed some photographs and stories and some data I had that I had both IMS and IOR certificates. So those are ensconced at MIT as part of their history of Doug Peterson yachting history and career.
So you were Commodore of the Sausalito Yacht Club, a wonderful yacht club. If you've been there lately, you know that they took the southern wall away about 10 years ago, enhancing the view dramatically. And recently they took a center wall out of the club, enhancing the whole clubhouse wonderfully. So you can see from, the northern end of the club through the view to San Francisco and all that. It's a great club. When you were Commodore, what percent of your billable hours do you think you spent on club activities? Tell somebody who's thinking about getting in the chairs about how much volunteer work a Commodore would do.
I figured the Commodore ship cost me 600 billed hours. I have to tell you that Ben McKesson was somebody I met through PCYA, had been Commodore of the San Diego Yacht Club. He was also an attorney. He thought it cost him 1,000 hours, but because not only does a past Commodore remain in the activities of the San Diego Yacht Club, you're also on the board of the House Corporation for the next 3 years. So it is a 9-year commitment down in San Diego. He figured it cost him $500,000. As I say, I figured it was about 600 hours. The big issue at the time was buying a committee boat. So I put together a limited partnership to buy Mercury, which is still being used as the committee boat for the Sausalito Yacht Club. It ended up 5 of us throwing in enough money to put the down payment in. We chartered the boat back to the club. We took the tax write-off, and lo and behold, at the end of I think it was 5 years, we sold the boat to the club at a reduced price, and both the club and us walked away.
So now, how much sailing are you doing? And you're living on your boat in Florida. Tell us about St. Pete.
The Gulf ain't Sausalito. Here in St. Pete, most people don't know this, but St. Petersburg is the lightning capital of this country. The first year I got the boat down here, a boat 2 berths down from me was hit directly by lightning. It blew out everything on that boat, both 110 and 12-volt systems, and my electronics blew out. It was a new B&G system. We had to replace that, and I spent the better part of a year arguing with insurance companies and getting replacement. The second year, we had a brush with a hurricane. The third year was Irma. You may have seen photographs of Tampa Bay that vacated all the water out of the bay. Of course, the boat went down, and when it came back up, a stanchion was under a fixed concrete dock. My stanchion was actually stronger than the dock, and lo and behold, the boat popped up with a broken stanchion and a partially broken dock. You understand how southern sailing can be locals. When we were sailing from Texas over here to St. Pete, we got hit with a local storm, and we spent 22 hours basically with sails down and a drogue behind the boat. There are many storms that occur in this area that you may hear about. My friend Talbot Wilson did a video of the damages to Pensacola Yacht Club that was shown by way of Latitude 38 last year, in which their committee boat was on the hard. The boat that I had done a race down to Isla Mujeres was also on the hard. Their entire junior program got pushed off into the parking lot. So things around here are a little bit more interesting.
So wait a second. So the question I asked was, how much sailing are you doing?
For the last 4 years, I've been pretty limited, either because of hurricanes and storms, or frankly, I had a battle with cancer, and I'm around to argue about it and complain about the medicines that they gave me. But hopefully all goes well with another hurricane season. The boat will be down in the Caribbean.
Good for you. So are you cruising around in the boat? Is that the model?
Another of those little things that you don't know about Tampa Bay. It's a big bay, but it's also extremely shallow. And Corsair draws 8 feet, and virtually most of the facilities in and around here, it's not unusual to be 5 and 6 feet as a entrance area. So if I'm sailing the boat, it's going out and going down towards the Keys or Tortugas. She hasn't actually left the dock for other than getting over to the yard and so forth for a while.
So when you were driving the boat, you were racing Serendipity 43s, that was a pretty competitive crowd. Chris Corlett was driving. Good guys were driving boats in those days. Were you inclined to want to go find pros to sail with you? And how did it feel when others did?
I should tell you a start of the Big Daddy Regatta over in Richmond. Chris was driving a boat called Terminator. It was a sister boat. It had been Highland Fling up in the Great Lakes. And I've forgotten what sail manufacturer he was involved with at that moment, but he was showing off.
Was he representing Horizon in those days?
I've forgotten whether it was UK but Scorpio was being driven by Norm Devant.
Yes.
And Norm was also trying to win the first race so he could advertise about his sailing expertise, as well as the new sails that he put on Scorpio. Well, he was trying to barge. Chris was pushing me up, and Corsair ended up the peanut butter in the sandwich. We got hit on both sides. Norm apologized profusely, and we went on for that regatta. But by and large, my boat, other than having the official amateur Bruce Easom on board for many of the races.
Wait, Bruce Easom or Scott? Bruce was Scott's dad.
Scott Easom.
Scott Easom. Yeah.
Bruce was actually his dad.
Yeah.
And I had sailed with him on several boats. And of course, Hank is the one that actually did the paint job on Corsair the first time.
Great. Back then.
There's a lot of Sausalito connection, even though the boat's now sitting here in St. Pete.
So now talk to us about the process of writing a book about your sailing adventures.
Don't do it. I started out thinking this would be a small project where I would just pull up my old scrapbook and generate a book. The actual written material is about 110 pages. There's over 100 pages of photographs. I found out that the cost of generating photographs is a much larger and more extensive program. So the process is that it gets essentially scanned for computer generation and then put into a program, and all of those photographs had to be individually cropped and sized, even though I was sending to the publisher, in effect, photographs of pages of a photograph. So they were screaming at me, charging me exorbitant rates. And if I sell 1,000 books, I may get back half of what I put into the book.
So these are projects of love, people tell us.
Absolutely.
When you do so. So how long was the process? How long before you first page to when you finished the book?
Well, I finished writing the materials in late 2017, and I was delayed a bit, and the publisher was also delayed a bit because of COVID. So the book actually hit the streets in the first part of March of this year, 2021.
And so when did you start writing? You finished in 2017. Well, how long did it take you to write?
My initial writing was started in 2013 after Ernie died, but I didn't actually start writing the book itself and these other chapters beyond Ernie until actually about 2016. And then I started gathering things together. So it was about 1.5 year process.
And you basically self-published it. And then how do you deal with Amazon? How do you handle the process of dealing with them?
Amazon is an amazing, in a former time, those companies were known as robber barons. They take 50% of the price that they are trying to charge. My publisher only takes about 35%. So there is lessons to be learned if you are dealing with Amazon. And because it is a limited edition, it is usually lost in the sea of other books that are being hawked by Amazon at any given moment. One of my friends tried to buy the book through Amazon and was told that he was in a mailing zone that they didn't mail to. He lives in Northern California. So
somebody wants to buy the book, they go to Amazon and they go, sure, 40 years of sailing?
They can do that. I recommend that they actually go to Outskirts Press and look up the same thing. They'll get a better price, and at least from the experience I've had, they'll get a better and quicker return.
Okay. Or the bookstore. You also have the bookstore in Sausalito that you wanted to suggest as well, correct?
The Sausalito Books on the Bay has volunteered to help me out. I'm also doing a show and tell and signature event at the Sausalito Yacht Club in August, and they're helping out in reference to that. So they have the book available as well.
So I'm looking on Amazon right now. I see the book costs $70. You go to the store, what does it cost?
Well, from outskirts, you can get it in the 50s.
And what about the store?
I think they're running at about the $50 range as well.
Wonderful. So, Greg Brown, it's been fun listening to a fellow San Francisco Bay sailor who's chronicled his many adventures in the book Shore, 40 Years of Sailing. And we wish you lots of luck in your sailing activities down in St. Petersburg. It's a beautiful place to sail. Serendipity 43, those are good pedigreed racing boats, and they come from a famous designer. Dougie was a great guy, such an incredibly colorful character. We wish you lots of smiles on the boat and lots of smiles promoting it with your book. Thank you very much for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.